Welcome back to Sun, Sand, and Sold. We're joined by Jonathan Weislow, Vice President from Cumming Group. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Great to see you.
Nice
Our
to see
pleasure.
you guys.
Great to see you.
Rapper and
Professor.
Rapper, professor, construction
former baseball
expert.
player.
Eclectic, if you will.
It's a collection of a URA 2024 Renaissance man.
Rank them in order. What are you?
We are going to touch on
I want to answer that question.
we are going to touch on Jonathan's burgeoning music career, but I got to ask before we even get into anything else, how does the wife feel about you potentially being a rap star?
I'll tell you what, she is incredibly supportive. I'm not saying that because I know she's going to watch this. She's actually very supportive. And
Well, it depends on how you refer to her in those rap songs.
this is true.
You
Yeah.
know, if you do what the other rappers do, she may not like it so much.
Yeah, there's none of the typical rap talk in there. It's like a
Okay.
more like self-realization approach to the whole
Oh,
thing.
so we're doing enlightened rap.
That's
By the way,
exactly, actually, that's what it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm coining the phrase. I am now
Enlightened rap.
I am now going to patent or copyright enlightened rap.
David's knowledge of rap, by the way, and R&B in general, froze around Run DMC. So we're working with some antiquated impressions and Public Enemy, and
But I'm more concerned about his ability to copyright this before I can, because I'm going to owe him some money at some point.
Enlightened rap.
I think for Gen Z,
That's
and
trademarking
I think for
everything.
Gen Z and millennials, enlightened rap sounds like right down the middle. I think that sounds perfect.
It's
if they're not on vacation while we're discussing it.
Right, exactly.
That's true. But yeah, no, it's been fun. My wife is a big supporter of it, and like it's one of those things where if you're gonna do it, like I'm already breaking the mold by attempting to do it. So then if you're gonna do it, you can't suck at it.
Do you have the dance and the moves to go with the rap too? Do we get the whole package when you do it?
So it depends what song.
Okay.
So far there have been no dances, right? But I do have. So I've got a single off of the album. I know it's hard for you guys to keep a straight face while I'm saying this, but I'm dead serious.
Okay.
So I've got a single off of the album that's going to come out soon, and then I'm going to do like an in-betweener where it's a Coconut Grove theme song, the Coconut
Wow.
Grove anthem. And we're going to involve a lot of, hey, I'm serious, man. We can't be laughing in my face.
I'm so
The
sorry.
Grove
Like that?
mainstays.
No.
Sorry.
There you go.
People get shot for that kind of.
I know, right?
What do they call it? Dissing?
That's what they still call it dissing.
Oh, they
Wow,
do.
Wow.
We are
Remember, we were-
devolving so rapidly.
We were talking earlier about the Ed Sullivan Show, what I used to watch in black and white. So for me to have a word like dissing and it still works, that's pretty good.
You know what's incredible is you have the best fashion sense out of anybody in this room.
Thank you
Effortlessly.
so much.
Yeah, mine is all muted, like
Well, that's because I am the star.
he is.
That's true.
You should see his rider, by the way. In fact, we got a copy of his rider this week. It was
Starburst, chocolate. You know those hot towels you get at a Japanese restaurant, you know, to wash your hands and
Of
your
course.
face?
as our marketing
Yeah, you gotta
executive,
have those.
our marketing executive pointed out that it was actually it made Mariah Carey's look soft.
Wow.
So that give you that.
This guy's
give you
a
that-
diva.
Give you that
Yeah,
perspective.
You have
I'm-
diva all over you.
But let me tell you something. I think at this point in my career, I've earned it.
I agree. You're somewhat of an enigma in the industry. You know
Well,
that,
I'm
right?
a little eccentric, but not so bad.
But I like that. You guys both are. You know that, right?
We're,
Yeah.
we're,
Like there's
we're,
like
we're weirdos, and that's why our audience is tuning in right now, and they want a little bit
Love
of
it.
that. I mean, you can't
So-
just talk real estate because you cry from boredom. So I think our idea was saying, look, our world here revolves around real estate, but it revolves around a lot else, and why not mix them together, because it's not all continuing education.
So why don't you talk for a moment about your career and the company you're with so that people get an idea of who you are before we get into the specifics of
before the grilling begins?
obviously you're not under the assumption everybody already knows who I am automatically.
yeah, but
So this is going to air before
This
my
is-
rap career takes
yeah,
off.
but
Okay.
really, just so that you know,
Yeah.
the audience here is not just people in the industry. It's
People like me.
everyday man.
Yeah.
Here's-
Sure.
Oh, by the way, Kyle, his real name is Everyday Man.
I
Do
think
you
it's-
own
I think
the
it's
copyright
I think
to
it
that
has
as well?
not
Not yet.
I think
I'm working
I
on
think
it.
it's everyman. I think everyday man sounds a little. It's It's a little opaque. It's
Okay. Every man. He's
Yeah,
every
we
man.
could do that.
Every man.
I'm there for it.
Kyle is not a real estate expert.
I am not.
Okay.
He isn't. He is an entertainment and production expert, and so
Love
he's essentially bringing the dynamic of I don't know what you guys are talking about. So when David and I start talking in real estate idiosyncratic terms, that Kyle can course correct and say I have no idea what you're talking
That's
about.
kind of
and
like
this is-
when we call it a multifamily dwelling, and he says, "Is that an apartment building?"
But you know what? Own it, man. It's
I know,
great.
right?
It's a great place to be.
I am there for it.
Well, he's a
Yeah.
condo owner, so it's like half the stuff we
Yeah.
talk about. I mean, what's great is when we raise these issues on the shows, Kyle gets his horrified look on his face, like, "Oh my god, I had no idea that was going on behind the scenes." He's like, "Who's making these decisions? Your board is," and he's like, "Oh, God."
Okay, right.
He's like, I know, Mrs. Smith, and she's a terror."
Let's
think
go back to your
Yeah.
other than your rap career and your famous UM baseball career. Tell us a little bit about your professional career.
Sure. I came from the GC side of the business, so I started working for Amicon Construction when we were just a small general contractor. I think I was employee like 10 or 11 or something. We were in a small little office in Edgewater before it was anything. I mean, I think
When Edgewater was just 20th Street to 36th Street.
Exactly. We were on 24th. We grew from a GC of, and I came in knowing nothing. I mean, I think my undergrad's in advertising and psychology, and my master's is in clinical psychology. I thought I wanted to be a sports psychologist, which I was poor, and my parents didn't have a lot of money. So like when you need to make money, you don't get a master's degree and then a PhD. Like it's a long road. So I fortunately met our CEO at Amicon, who's Adam Opsick, and I didn't know the difference between a soffit and a screwdriver, but I was determined that like if I'm going to do anything, no different than rap music, I'm going to do it well. So, it's one of those things where I was conditioned and I was disciplined from sport, and I was used to getting up early in the morning and preparing, and then doing your business during the workday, and then preparing more in the night, so you're more prepared than the next person. So, I think I ascended pretty quickly. Became a project manager. I went from like guy with no title who just did things and took notes and printed stuff to project manager in like a year and a half, which is. I also don't necessarily think that opportunity exists in this market anymore because we have more established professionals doing the work. It was a much, I'm not going to say it was in its infancy, but relative to where it is now,
And it was probably timely for you at that moment. I mean, it was like there was probably a window that existed then that might not, for somebody with a similar background, might not exist.
Yeah. So I eventually became, vice president of the company. We amicably separated from our GC partners and decided that we wanted to start a consulting company, an owner representation company, which you want to talk about infancy. I mean, I'm not going to say we invented it, but
Why don't you tell people what an owner's rep does?
Sure. So an owner's rep is we act as an educated owner in real estate and construction projects. So
you help the owner understand all about the construction. You help negotiate the contract with the contractor. You coordinate for the owner in terms of logistics, right?
yes, all of that. And we explain it to an owner in a way that they understand, right? That
To the
fits in with
everyman.
their goals. So we started as a small owner representation company, which most owners reps were small and I think are small. Although that whole industry has completely changed. And, we started with a couple of houses. Adam lived in a neighborhood where people were building some pretty big houses and needed some help. And so Adam would consult, and the fees were very nominal. Then it became one HOA. And then we found just this niche in HOAs. There was like this.
HOAs are homeowners associations, but it's really condominiums, not HOAs, right?
This happened to be an HOA. It was Williams Island was what it was. So it was
right. Okay.
It was a combination, right? But for the most part, it's condominium associations. But we found this niche where like you're working for this group of smart, capable professionals in other industries who know very little about the construction or real estate market, specifically in the market they're dealing with, which is usually large-scale renovations, capital improvement projects, or restoration projects. So, you deal with some good, smart people who
Some.
I'm going to let you lead on that, and I believe me, I will follow. If you introduce that.
I think we have talked about this before, that you want to talk about everyman. Luxury high-end condominiums typically do have successful people
Sure.
who are in different businesses, whether they be doctors, lawyers, accountants, real estate developers. It's not often you get a developer or contractor on the board, but in other older condominiums that you've dealt with that have projects in the 40 to 60-year-old range, and they're condominiums that they bought for 100 or 200,000 and now they're worth 500,000, but their assessment is going to be 15 to 40 million dollars in order to fix this condominium up because they haven't reserved for 30 years and they haven't kept the building up. They're not all sophisticated, and some of them really have no clue.
Yeah, and I think what's important to understand is they don't know. A lot of them don't know that they don't have a clue. And I think I've kind of seen that evolution.
And how do you teach? How do you nicely and reasonably respectfully try to educate them that they're uneducated about these issues?
It's difficult, which is also why owner representation in and of itself has so many different sectors with so many different areas of expertise. Like it's
sort of subjective at face value in terms of what does an owner's rep do. I mean, obviously there's a scope, but it's sort of saying at what point do you need an owner's rep? At what point does that get activated?
Yeah, like how big a project would you say needs an owner's rep? So let's say a condominium has a $250,000 project or a $500,000 project. Is that below the range where it needs an owner's rep, or do you need to be $1 million or more to have an owner's rep?
So let's go back to what Josh said, because I think an owner's rep is a broad term, but there's so many different services and products that are provided within that umbrella. Some smaller projects, I can tell you, the smaller projects usually need somebody who's competent to liaise, but the budgets don't necessarily warrant spending the money on it, right? And that's a problem. And then there's a whole other discussion to talk about the types of contractors and professionals you get on the smaller projects because there's no money to be made in them. So
and especially with the new laws that have been passed, the need for engineers, owners reps, contractors, subcontractors, they're in such demand right now that you can't even get quality people to do the work on smaller projects.
So here's the deal with that. Like let's go into that because it's getting worse. And I believe it's probably not going to get much better in the immediate.
Everyman, that's bad news for you.
Thank you for sharing.
I don't know where you live. I probably don't say it.
Coral Gables.
I love the Gables.
I
I'm
do
a
too.
Grove guy. I'm a Grove guy.
We're neighbors.
It's kind of brother sister. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I know Gables is its own city, but like they really do seem like they're kind of pair bonded in some
What
way.
we don't have, they have, and what they don't have, we have.
I think Coconut Grove is a little bit more residential in feel, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway. It's a little bit more behaviour.
It's kind of like a husband and wife. What one has, the other doesn't.
You're going off track,
It's
David.
very
Please
true.
continue.
Sometimes he brings us together, and sometimes he's like, "Do you?"
Right.
That's when I just start staring
I'm
off
just
to the
throwing you
horizon.
off guard for a
He's
minute.
testing me.
Well, you're a rapper, so you should be able to transition very quickly.
This is true. Watch this pivot, okay? We just went from the bridge. Here is the chorus. There is so much demand right now in condos and specifically in the restoration projects, okay? And there are not enough qualified professionals to execute the work at any level. There's not enough qualified attorneys. There's not enough qualified property management companies. There's not enough qualified engineers. There's not enough qualified cost specialists, project managers, general contractors, subcontractors. It goes down the list. Because specifically in this market, there's so much other work going on right now that is so much easier to do. Business to business is much easier to do.
So you're saying because the development right now, especially in high-rise condo, is so explosive, many people don't want to do the restoration projects?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a niche market where you've got some contractors and engineers that you see. It's a revolving door. It's the same group of people that are qualified that are doing a lot of the condo restoration projects. And they're messy, they're complicated, they're very political. You have to have very sophisticated EQ or not, and just to have thick skin and a wherewithal to continue doing it.
EQ being emotional
intelligence is.
When you say that there's a lack
I have
of
none of that.
qualified,
I'm a professor.
when you say there's a lack of qualified professionals, is it because they don't exist? Is it because people are not willing to pay the money for qualified professionals? What is the catalyst
I
of
would
the
say
shortage?
Great question. I would say they exist, and the ones who are smart enough to understand what the industry is don't want to do it because there's easier ways to make money.
So let's
Okay.
let's translate, because I think you're dancing around, I think, the point, and I understand why, but working with condo boards is some of the most challenging work that people in this industry can do.
Yes.
And David knows it, I know it, you know it. I'd be curious as to say, why from your perspective, I know why from my perspective, David knows from it, why is it so hard? I mean, we talk about it being political. We throw these terms out.
Try telling a board that a change order is proper.
But you're going down the road that I'm going down, because at the end of the day, a lot of the time, sometimes I get caught up in my own over intellectualizing the problem, and I say really at the end of the day, it's mostly about money. It mostly is saying when money needs to be spent, the political issues begin, and that is from day one. And so even in deciding we need a project manager, we need an owner's rep, we need to, use the best of the best on engineering. From my perspective, so much of it stems just from the spend, as opposed to some, innate issue that we've got to, execute psycho jujitsu around.
Yeah, psycho jujitsu.
All right, we're going to copyright that term. Everybody out there, do not steal that.
But seriously, I mean, do you find that to be the case, or is it just because you're dealing with individuals who are lay people and not experts?
I think it's a combination, right? And I think the best thing you can have on a board is a group of people who are a designated rep for the board, right? Who's self-aware. Regardless, as long as they're self-aware and accurate, that's what you need.
But would you agree with this, that one of the difficulties in raising money for these capital projects for condominiums, especially with concrete and stucco restoration, balcony restoration, parking deck restoration, is because they have not been taken care of for 20 to 40 years, and we live in a very corrosive salt air environment. What happens is they pass a special assessment for $15 million, which means you need buy-in from the ownership, and then you start the project and they chip away and they find out there's more corrosion, there's more cracking, there's more problems, and it now becomes $25 million, and you're the owner's rep who has to explain not just to the board, but to the owners, that 15 became 25. How difficult is that?
It depends. It depends on your experience level. I want to answer a couple of questions, right? Because you asked a question like, doesn't it all stem from money? The answer is yes, right? If the money's there and the project is within budget, generally it's pretty easy to execute, okay? Someone asked me the other day, why is the project behind schedule? Why is the project over budget? I'm like, who developed the budget and the schedule? What information was it based on? Right? Because the project always, with some degree of variance, is going to cost what it's going to cost, and it's going to take as long as it takes, right? There's some number there that it's always has to be that.
Right. How long is it going to rain until it stops?
Exactly. Right. And so it all stems from expectations. And one of the biggest problems, especially from us as an owner's rep, we get in to be the coach, right? And coach or quarterback, right? Depending on how hands-on you need to get, to manage many times a budget that's been established by people who should not have been establishing budgets. And
so does that mean that you should be brought in as the owner's rep prior to them creating the budget and the time schedule and all of those things?
Absolutely.
So getting your owner's rep in early is very important in terms of getting accurate assumptions and accurate expectations.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing, let me just finish with that, because I think at the end of the day, it's people, right? I mean, the whole thing is done with people, and people need to execute. Until we get into AI and robots, where the industry is going to change. But if you're going to have somebody lead your team and lead your project and your community to success, they should be responsible and accountable, not in terms of money, but just accountable for, the collateral that comes with the decisions that are made with assembling the team and coming up with the original strategy. I think many times, often, it's near impossible to salvage a project that was mismanaged from the get-go, or the incorrect strategy was implemented, or you have the wrong players. So I believe the owner's rep needs to be brought in from the get-go to bring the team together and establish a baseline strategy that everybody signs off on.
But that means people have to be willing to spend the money early on to save the money later, because what people don't understand is if you're paying an owner's rep $10,000 a month and nothing's going on, it drives them nuts. But what they don't realize, it's many times like lawyers, bring the lawyer in to negotiate the legal terms of the contract now to avoid a $4 million fight later.
I have a question to pull all this back. Who is your client? What would I be listening for to say, hey, I know a guy that does this? I mean, I have a sense of exactly what you do. Sure. But, he says, well, you pay someone $10,000 a month. Well, that's a certain level client. So I guess my question is, who is your client, and how does someone know if they really need you?
Yeah, it's a good question. And also, it used to be $10,000 a month. I can tell you the qualified professionals are charging a lot more than that right now. Because now we understand what it is. Okay. Right? Now, when you understand what it is to do the project
you've handicapped the market now.
Exactly.
So somebody just buying a property is not necessarily your client.
Well, they are in a different market, right? Okay. So we represent, in terms of our company and what we do, we represent a vast array of different types of clientele.
Do you represent developers of commercial, shopping centers, or commercial or retail establishments? Someone's building a big hotel or a big restaurant or a big adventure game space. So you do that. You do the condo space. Do you do developer space for condos?
Yes, we do. Okay. Essentially, if you have a real estate project, we can handle it.
Even a big single family home you'll do.
Yeah, we do a lot of luxury residential.
Miami Beach, Coral Gables, Sunny Isles.
All of the above.
Golden Beach.
Yes, all of the above.
Do you guys go up to, since we have a Palm Beach audience, do you do Palm Beach proper and places like that?
We do.
So then let me build on what Kyle said and sort of tying this all together. Your value proposition. You're sitting in front of a condo association. Let's take your bread and butter business. What is the value proposition when somebody's saying, why are we paying you X number of thousands of dollars a month? I mean, what's the 30-second elevator pitch that you feel like, at least based on your history, has landed?
It's all opportunity cost, right? So we're qualified professionals. If you want to figure out if you break your finger, okay, and you want to figure out how to put it back together, you can probably figure out how to do it, and it's probably not going to look right at the end, but you didn't pay the money for a doctor to do it.
Yeah, you had Josh do it.
I would totally trust Josh to fix my...
Look at that face. And by the way, what a radio voice.
Unbelievable.
I know, right?
Unbelievable.
And I get his actual voice next to me and it in the headphones.
And he fixed your finger. Got it.
So anyways, you probably wouldn't hire Josh to fix your finger.
I'm glad we have so many disclaimers at the front side of the show. This is just, and I'm glad we have an attorney on the show. This is how it goes sideways.
So it's opportunity cost, and we establish a strategy and get the right consultants on board to make your project cost as little as it needs to for the quality that's going to be there. And we also understand your needs. Sometimes it's about money. Sometimes it's about time. Sometimes it's about functionality, right? A lot of times it's about the experience. So a client may have different priorities. It's our job to make sure that a project that at the end of the day is just building something or fixing something encompasses the priorities of the clientele. Make sense?
And that puts you more in that gray space, because obviously engineers and contractors are more linear in approach, right? Yes. It's literally based on a spec, a set of plans, design drawings, RFPs, et cetera, whereas it sounds to me like your space is more the human side of things, and to say, let's talk about your priorities. I mean, listen, for the years and I've been in property management, how long is my pool going to be out of service? One of those those conversations, the time issue.
Yes.
Then there's the dollars issue of saying, well, we can't spend $20 million, and you're sitting with engineers and project managers and contractors who say, but it's $20 million. I mean, it's like, if you don't spend the $20 million, then you're not doing the project you're talking about.
For sure.
Let me ask you another question. Do you ever get involved, and this is I just thought of this. Do you ever get involved in, let's say the architect or the engineer specs a certain product, whether it's a floor tile outside, a pool deck tile?
Sure.
Do you ever look at it from an owner's rep perspective and say, this is a terrible idea? The maintenance on this is going to be crazy. And do you then whisper in the owner's ear saying, you really ought to consider changing this because you're never going to be able to maintain this?
Yeah. I would say more tactfully than saying it like that. But
Well, I
yes.
never said I was tactful. Right, Josh?
Tact is not his strong suit.
Well done.
Yeah, that's his short game.
But I will. But absolutely, that's our job, right? So we look at it holistically. Like
That's good.
we have to look at a project holistically. That's our job.
So architects typically on a restoration project will charge a fee based on a percentage of construction. Let's say it's 3% or whatever it is. And I don't know that that's the number, but instead of a monthly fee, because sometimes these projects can get drawn out, will you do a fee based on percentage cost of construction?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about how I could say this effectively. Absolutely not. So, and here's why.
That was effective.
I don't know if that.
Well,
It wasn't
came through.
ambiguous.
every
Not at
man
all.
needs to know.
Right.
And here's why. And I don't believe in that model. Okay. I believe in it as a metric of kind of understanding where you're going to land if you're budgeting, right? Like we look and we know our fees are going to be X percentage of a project depending on what kind of project it is. Like as a ballpark as we're performing, right? But if you're going to have the best intentions of the association in mind or your client in mind, you should in no way be tied to what the project costs.
Good point.
I get that.
Right, because again, it's inherent bias. Because therefore, the more expensive the project, the more fees you're drawing, and thereby your advice is loaded.
Exactly. So if the client's priority is to save money, and this used to be a model that we refused just from an ethical standpoint to partake in, but there used to be a model where an owner's rep would come in and take a percentage of the savings. So they just come in and they inflate the budget and then know that they could get the project done for less.
I have another scenario, and that is where they cut the budget to make more money. They take shortcuts and cheapen the materials.
Exactly.
Go with a cheaper design, something that'll take more maintenance, and they save $5 million, and then they get a percentage of the savings rather than do what's right for the client in the long term.
Agreed. And that's why I think it's just an unethical model as a service provider. We're cost of goods. That's what we are. We're human capital. So our people cost us a certain amount of money, and we make a profit on them and
So you're
their
just
time.
capital.
You're just capital.
You're what do you call it? Wrapper capital.
I
Tag
could.
that
We're
one.
not going to copyright.
Should
this.
we go there?
I do have
No.
another
No,
question
that's
for you.
not a good.
Rapital. Go ahead.
Rapital. Okay, Rapital. I'm
I
going
might
for
take
that.
that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in your
songwriter.
industry, if someone is looking for someone that do the things that you do, what are some of the questions that they would need to ask to determine, that you are the best fit versus somebody else who is not? Because someone coming to you obviously don't have the knowledge that you three have. So educate our audience on what questions should they be asking someone in your field to make sure that they select you over someone that's not as qualified or provide the same level of quality.
Can they sing well?
Again, it depends on the priorities of the project and what type of project it is, but generally there's the technical skill sets that somebody should have as a baseline, right?
Would the
That's
everyday
that.
man know that, though? I'm speaking from my perspective. I know that I need someone, but I don't know what questions to ask to pick the best company, best person. What is it? What should that conversation look like with someone that really don't know? They just know they need you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should. There's a like any consultant, you should feel comfortable with them. There should be a level of comfort where in trust and rapport that's established from the get-go. And you can't fake that. There are people that try and fake that.
Right.
You cannot fake that. That's real, okay? And then it comes down to the core competencies. And I think it comes down to honesty. I don't know how to tell you how to judge it. Like some of it's feel, right? It's
Right.
just it's gut feelings.
But it's also reputation in the community. It's asking other
It's referrals.
owners,
Yes.
other condominiums. Who did you use? How were they? Did they help you get your project done on time? How were they organizationally? Which person within the company did you use? Because that makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Huge. Yeah, great point. And I would
Huge,
say
like Trump huge or just huge?
huge.
Huge.
I'd say huge. That was not my best Trump. But yeah, I mean, every team, I'm not going to say they have A, Bs, and Cs, but they have different teams that are better for different dynamics. So, I
So
do
you
think-
try to take your teams and focus them like who's best for this single family luxury, who's best for the high rise, who's best for the low rise.
Yeah, and some of that is technical competencies, right, and experiences in that niche. And other times it's the personality, right? We may have, somebody who's got it'll be a great personality match, and then you supplement them with somebody who's got more of the technical know-how. So how we put our teams together is very strategic in terms of the clientele that we're working with.
Now I want to talk a little bit about the South Florida marketplace,
Sure.
which really is what this is all about at Sun Sand and Sold. So we have a changing marketplace over the last 5 years since COVID, with people from New York and Silicon Valley and other places moving to Florida, South Florida in particular, high-end residential buyers, high-end condominium buyers. And, even some of the office space getting to outrageous numbers, $150 a foot on Brickell or $165 a foot on Brickell. One of the questions I have is, and of course, because of the new laws that were changed for condominiums, you're talking about increased pricing, increased labor costs. Where do you see the market going over the next few years? Do you see it continuing? And if so, what does that mean for every man in terms of what he's going to pay for any kind of services or construction materials?
You said high end like 4 times, right? And I think there's always going to be a market for high end here because things have just become more expensive for all the reasons that you mentioned. So I think that there's a strong market for high end. Most of the developments that you see being built right now are ultra luxury because people can pay that delta. I mean, it wasn't too long ago if a space was $1,500 a foot, that was outrageous. Now you've got Four Seasons is going for $3,500 a foot, and that's doesn't sound that outrageous to us. So I think that's always going to be here. Look, and then apartments, right? Rentals are also another market. They're going through the roof. Why? Because you have to shell out less money, right? You can go, month to month, or you sign an annual lease. It gives you some flexibility. And because of what's happened to the economy with inflation, people have less capital to put down.
Do you see a lot more of that multifamily apartment buildings being built down here than have been built in prior decades?
Yeah, absolutely. We do.
You see a lot of them. You see a lot of them in, I guess, the area west, south of Midtown, north of downtown. You see a lot of those buildings going up near I-95.
Yes. And those products are not ultra luxury at all.
Right.
They have amenities that function. They look cool. They've got minimalist finishes, cool colors, nice branding, but ultimately they're less expensive. I'm not going to say cheap. But
they're not cheap.
They're not cheap, but they're less expensive to build. And they pencil from a rent perspective. And rents are higher than they used to be. I mean, I remember, in grad school when I was first on my own as an adult, I was paying like $1,200 a month.
Yeah, now my son's paying $3,500 a month for a 1-bedroom.
It's unbelievable. So, those numbers work, and that's kind of the new norm. South Florida used to be like this undiscovered gem, right? And we look around and be like, why would you ever live in New York when you can get this for a fraction of the price? And now it's like the secret's out.
Right.
Yeah.
So John, I want to get a little more granular. Our lead into the show, we talked a fair bit about Senate Bill 4D and the Clarification Bill 154. Obviously, it's had huge implications on the way that condominiums have to reserve and the approach that they're going to have to take in terms of capital restoration. Post Surfside, what have you seen as the most appreciable changes in the marketplace from your firm's perspective? What's different now in 2024 than we might have seen in 2019?
I think there's much more of a demand for our services. I think our services used to be a luxury. Now they're almost mandated. I think because the market has become educated.
And they know that they need your help. They need lawyers. They need engineers. They need owners reps because they got to protect themselves now as board members because the laws have changed.
Yeah, now it's liability, right? Now everyone is out to not be liable for this. They want to insulate themselves with as many layers as possible with professionals.
Which actually improves the product, the cost, and the communication with the ownership.
And it's the way it should have been done from the get-go.
Well, that's why they changed the laws.
Exactly. That's how law works, right?
That's right.
So you're seeing an increased demand. Are there tactical changes you're seeing? I mean, are you seeing strategies that are different because they know they're going to be either more liable down the road or because they're going to have to reserve, and therefore if we're going to do it, let's do it all. I mean, what are you seeing or hearing from boards or residents in terms of, now that this is the case, here's what we got to do?
So back to our original discussion is kind of what the makeup is of a board, right? You used to have people that were on there, and I think you still do to some extent, that have some bit of an ego, or they ran on some sort of political prowess, or with some promise that they were going to do X, Y, and Z.
Always a promise.
Freeze maintenance rates or whatever. Right?
Yeah, something, right? That then they had to make happen once they're sitting in the chair. And they're looking these people in the eyes in the elevator and down the hallway, right? So there's a tremendous amount of political pressure to make these sorts of things happen. So, as a byproduct of that, when you're a consultant for these types of people, I'm talking about them like they're aliens, like they're people, right? But
Are they aliens?
They might be.
Well, they sure talk like aliens.
It's a different podcast.
If I'm happy to go there, but so you get muscled around by these people, and they pull you over and say, "Hey, we got to make this happen on the side." And does that still happen? Yes. Are we much more disciplined in how we manage those conversations? Absolutely. Are they more cognizant of the repercussions of them attempting to be more autonomous on a board? Absolutely. So I think that just there's such a heightened awareness to the consequences of making the wrong decision as a board member and the liability that's associated with that we get a little more leeway, and we need it.
Let's talk about the flip side of that.
Shoot.
When is there a time when a person wasn't smart enough to hire you, where the train have left the station? Is there a point in time where a person will come to you and you just say to them, you know something, you're a day late and $1 short? Or is your company capable of cleaning up a mess in the last hour and making it work?
So it depends. I mean, I can tell you we turn down more work than we take on right now.
Why is that?
Because the demand, there's such a demand for his services.
So there is a day late, $1 short kind of thing?
All the time.
Well,
I had a
also,
conversation yesterday. Yeah.
Also because the law changed, everybody's on a time clock and they got to get this work done now. I want to ask you a question. It's very granular, using Josh's term. Pool decks. And then they put stuff on top of pool decks.
Sure.
It used to be people would try to save $50,000 or $100,000 on the waterproofing, and they would get a 5-year warranty. And what they didn't realize was that it's $500,000 or $1 million to pull up the tile and put it back. When you're recommending waterproofing, which is a huge issue in our environment, are you recommending 15 and 20 year waterproofing warranties?
Absolutely.
And are you, and now I'm going to use a real technical term for the everyman, are you negotiating for overburden warranties? And overburden means what you put on top, so that if the waterproofing fails, they don't just have to give you new waterproofing. They've got to pay to take off the tile, put the tile back. You pay more for it, but then you have a real warranty that has some real grip.
But that cost is trickling down to the owner, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But remember, that's the 85-year-old guy who says, I don't care what happens in 20 years because I'm not going to be here.
So what are you seeing?
It's true. So the answer is yes. And I think the conversation, now we have more case studies, right? We have more examples where it's not just us talking philosophically, right? We have case studies that are right in front of us as to how these things have gone wrong because the wrong decisions were made. And we're using those and we're saying, listen, you want to be like these guys? You can make this cheap decision, okay? And that's on you. But this is our recommendation. And then if somebody chooses an alternative, they're signing off on it, right? And it's not just us; it's the other professionals that are involved that are not going to put their stamp of approval on it.
And I want to ask you one other question, and that is, what are the interactions? How are you finding the interactions between owner's rep and the management company and the lawyer? And how does the owner's rep work in coordination with these people?
So it depends who the people are. That's first and foremost, depends who they are and how they interact. I can tell you there's a lot more respect given across the board to the owner's rep now, because it's also, I don't think the property managers want to take on that responsibility, whereas before you would see the property managers would also try and project manage, really to prove that they can do it, right? And maybe there was compensation involved, or maybe it got
That's how
them in
they
better.
sold the contract. Oh, sure, we can do that project. Right.
And we would see that too. Property management companies would say they also did project management, or they would call it owner representation. And by the way, we see that from engineers too. They say they do project management. They say they do owner representation, and they're very, very different services. So now I think that there's separation of church and state, and I think everyone wants to stay in their lane and defer some of these technical questions to the owner's rep, which then we'll defer down to the general contractor and the architect, and we'll disseminate the information to the respective specialists and then funnel it up.
So the way I look at it, you're working with the property management company on logistics. When can I close the pool deck? How are you going to communicate with ownership, the unit owners, when we have to close the parking garage, have the entrance and exit, change, or how to deal with the driveway and things like
Where's
that.
my money?
And and then
We're getting paid, man.
Let's get real.
and then
You're 3
and then
invoices behind.
I refuse to work anymore. Yeah.
and then you're working with the law firm in order to negotiate the contracts, right? And if a problem comes up, what's your interaction with the engineer in terms of either analyzing the bids, deciding who should bid, negotiating the warranties and the technical parts of the contract? The lawyer does the legal parts, but are you involved up front with the engineer on specs or reviewing the specs? Are you involved in, let's get a 20-year warranty, not a 10-year warranty? Are you involved in any of that and the sequencing of that?
Yeah, I would also say, we also stay in our lanes as well. So we want the engineers.
Well, that's why I want to know what the interaction is.
Yeah, we want the engineers to be able to engineer, right? At the end of the day, we may have, and we do have, people that are GCs and architects and engineers on staff, but we're not acting as the engineer or the architect or the GC. We're the owner's rep. So we do allow, it's their job, the engineers to spec out all of the products, put together the bid sheets, the bid forms. What we'll typically do is merge that with a larger bid form that has some of the other elements that an engineer may not be aware of. We manage things like contingencies. Like I said from the beginning, like a budget or a schedule, you go over budget or over schedule because the expectations were either set correctly or incorrectly, right? And so we work in a lot of the contingencies and unexpecteds based on our experience. Like you said, an engineer is very linear, right? It either is or it isn't. Whereas we take into consideration the intangibles and put together a much more comprehensive budget. Now, when we interact with the general contractors, like the bid process, let's talk about that. The bid process is a little bit about the numbers. Okay. At the end of the day, it costs what it costs. The material costs what it costs. The contractor needs to make a markup on top of it. They're entitled to make money. They need to make a fee. The logistics are very important to consider. And that's usually something that the engineer does not necessarily go into, right? They spec products. They don't want liability for the logistics of the project. But depending on what the requirements are for access, for different events that a building or a property might be having, for what the fencing needs to look like do areas need to temporarily be landscaped?
Right.
Or what hours can you work?
Our winter
can
party
you
is
work
gonna
on a
be
Saturday?
Exactly.
Do you have to be off for 3 weeks or 2 weeks during the holidays in December? And, can you work long holiday weekends when there's a holiday on Friday? You deal with all of that stuff.
All of that. And we work that into the initial bid, and also the interview process with the contractors is extremely important.
So let's say, and this is something that every man is interested in, what happens when you take 4 bids, 3 bids, 5 bids, and one contractor is just so low compared to everybody else? And you, as the owner's rep, this is a great. I'm not going to say
I'm
that
going to enjoy
I'm
this
saying it's a
answer.
great question.
I'm going to enjoy this.
How do you, as the owner rep, communicate to the board that can't wait to grab that contractor at that low price? How do you communicate? There's something wrong with this bid. You're going to get change ordered to death. There's no way the contractor can do this for, 70% of what every other contractor is charging. There's something wrong here. Or they're going to get unskilled people and you're not going to get the quality product. How do you explain that to people that are trying to save money?
Can I pretend to be a lawyer right now?
Yeah.
Objection asked and answered. You asked it and answered it. at
But
the same
no,
time.
but how do you-
Something's wrong with it.
Literally just like that.
If it's too good to be true, it probably is.
And so you can sniff it, right? You can tell through
But
experience.
that's not going to be enough for me to want to save that kind of money, though. I'm going to need a little bit more meat on the bones. I mean, if I'm looking at a contract where I'm going to save
$1 million, million
that
and a
type
half.
of
Every man has
money.
spoken.
So-
No, and obviously we run into this all the time. Right. I
Right.
mean, this is
That's why I'm asking.
if I'm saving $1 million, it's going to be a little bit more of, well, if you do this one, it's more quality professionals. I mean, for someone that don't understand what you do, I don't
Yeah.
understand.
For sure.
All I'm saying is I'm saving my building $1 million.
And let me just say something too. We work for the client. So if it's a board, we work for the board. If it's a homeowner, we work for the homeowner. If it's a developer, we work for the developer. We make recommendations. We don't make decisions. Whatever ownership wants to do, they can do it.
And
So-
I, as the lawyer, say document the hell out of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So,
What's your experience with those people? Let's say the board takes the $1 million, $2 million cheaper contractor, has your experience been that in the end they're not really saving the money, or would you say half the time they really are saving the money?
So I wish I could give you a short answer, and I know I've given some long-winded responses here, but it really depends on what the project is, when it's occurring, and what the market is, right? And so sometimes contractors will, inflate their numbers because they're too busy to take on the project, right? And out of respect, they want to give
the bid, no bid.
right. So sometimes the right number might be the lower number, right? And sometimes
So you're saying that there are contractors that don't want to upset the management company or the engineer, so they're throwing in a bid to be nice because they've been asked to submit a bid, but they really don't want the work, so that they'll come in with a high number, with a high profit, because they know their bid won't be taken, and they can go back to the other work that they're already working on.
Or if it is, they
I never even thought of that.
Or if it is, they justify it because we say, well, we didn't want the work, but we're going to make so much damn money on it that we'll take it anyway.
I never even thought of that.
yeah. I mean, look, some people are like, look, we're too busy. We can't do it. Others are like, look, if I'm going to do this project, I'm going to make a lot of money, like you just said, right? And other people may have a backlog that keeps pushing back and projects can't start and they need some work. So you're going to get a good contractor.
That's a good point.
You're going to get a good contractor at a great price because they really need to.
So in other words,
their
they
people
have
work.
that gap between jobs that just came open because one job for $20 million just got pushed back a year. And so therefore they got a year there and they got to fill it, and they got all these workers so they can afford to work for less because it's a quick fill.
Because it's that or it's nothing.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And look, thanks for helping me sell our services, but we have insight into the market because we're working on hundreds of projects, right?
So
and that's not an exaggeration.
You know who can and can't do the work at a given point in time.
Yes.
And that's an important job of an owner's rep.
For sure.
To say, that guy is so busy with these 5 other projects, there's no way he's going to bring your project in on time.
And a lot of times too, it's, listen, we know this contractor has the right team available as well. Or maybe you're getting a good number from this contractor, but you're getting their B team. Or you're getting their C team. And for that reason, you don't want to use them.
How do contractors respond to your demand for a liquidated damages per day?
Okay, well, he doesn't answer that first. Explain that to me. What does that mean?
So liquidated damages is, I can't determine the exact amount of damage that I am going to suffer per day if you are late on delivering the project. Now, you get change orders for time based on it rained too much. So, your hurricane days, rain days.
Force majeure.
You can get an extension on the time. Let's say the time is supposed to be 180 days to do the project. I'm just using a random number. And let's say you do a change order for 30 days because of rain, hurricanes, and the like. So now you're up at 210. The question is, what if the contractor, instead of coming in on day 210, they don't come in till day 350? How does the owner get, some kind of compensation for not being able to use their property and not having the pool deck available and this, that, and the other? How do they kind of force the contractor to have a monetary penalty if they don't deliver on time? And the answer is a liquidated damages provision. And so it'll be $500 a day, $300 a day, $1,000 a day, in order to force the contractor's feet to the fire to finish on time. Now, I find personally that developers have a much easier time getting a liquidated damages provision on a new development because there's no owners in the way. There's no condominium owners that say you can't close this time, open this time. The developer wants it done immediately. They'll work 6 days a week. They'll work all day. They'll ask for extra time from the city to work at night or on a Sunday if they have to. And working for 300 owners for a condominium is like trying to, thread the needle because, you got Christmas and the pool has to be open then. You got 400 cars. Where are you going to park them? How do you find contractors being responsive to liquidated damages in today's market?
So a couple of things, because I think it's an important note. You mentioned holidays or open, when a pool can be open or when work can happen and work hours, like those things need to go in the contract from the get-go to set expectations.
Those get carved out because they're basically saying, so you can't hold us accountable to liquidated damages for time lost on that because it's like force majeure where basically we can't work, so therefore it's not part of our timeline.
Exactly.
Right, but if it's 180 work days, then how are they, what are you finding in the marketplace?
The market's changed because there's so much demand. I think it's more on the contractor side now. The contractor knows that the associations, if we're talking about associations, probably needs them more than they need the work.
So the contractors right now have the leverage to say, we're not going to accept a liquidated damages provision. Or if we do, it's going to be $100 a day or
correct
$250. It's not going to be $1,000.
You're not seeing heavy liquidated damages.
And what about for developers or single family homeowners?
I think that's easier to quantify. I think that relationship, it's business to business, and the projects are usually more straightforward. Right.
And therefore, it's easier to finish that job quickly because you don't have the outside factors of 300 people living there while you're trying to do your construction project.
Way less variables. It's a more streamlined process. And I think everybody agrees to a very professional, most of the time linear. Like there's a lot of different variables that affect it, but most of the time it's more straightforward. So absolutely, it's more agreeable. And you can quantify what deltas have been worked in there to modify the schedule. Like, okay, like we made a decision a week late, so you get another week on the schedule. With associations and groups of people and, then the fiduciaries, it's hard because so many different people affect the things that end up happening on a construction site.
Right. Jonathan, I got some rapid fire questions for you that I think our audience, often asks us as experts. I think the first of which is, number one, do you have a standardized set of best practices to say, look, above and beyond, the more idiosyncratic consultation that we do based on the project, are there, 5 or 10 rules that you guys universally follow to say, look, no matter what you do, no matter how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take, here's the things that you always want to do? Or do you find that every project is so different, there's no way to assign that kind of general rule condition? I'd
say at the end of the day, everybody who's involved, it always comes back to people. It just does. Everyone who's involved has to have integrity and ethics. That's a baseline.
Ethics. Remember, we're in South Florida.
It's tough, but I refuse to work otherwise. I got to sleep at night, man.
But there are people in South Florida that contractors that are just not on the up and up. And more in the single family space. Roofers. They, after a hurricane, they come in, they take your money, and off they go.
All right, let's go into that for a sec. We talked about my eclectic background, right? And I'm in a lot of different things, and you guys have eclectic personalities and diverse personalities. I think that's good, right? We have a very dynamic room in here, and I think that when your validation doesn't come from your job, I think when your validation doesn't come from the projects and what you're in every day to make a living, it's easier to look at it holistically. And I think that you have to take that approach to projects. And so when you have the ability to do that, you can walk away from things that aren't managed ethically. You can walk away from people who are in this industry who refuse to act professionally. You have the ability to do that.
You see it coming and you're like, I'm not going there.
Refuse to engage.
But there are, you do run into that.
Absolutely, and we refuse to engage.
Yeah.
Me personally, I refuse to engage in my personal life. If somebody's doing things that aren't ethical or that lack integrity, I just don't have the bandwidth.
Then let me throw one of my rapid fires in because we get this from homeowners associations a lot. How much unethical financial dealing do you believe still exists in this marketplace in terms of board kickbacks, in terms of property manager kickbacks, in terms of that. I mean, there was a hallmark quite some time ago in South Florida. It was notorious, and I think it's improved from my perspective. But I'm curious how much you actually see of that, or hear rumblings of.
Yeah, I can tell you, we never see it, right? Like we manage, we'll do accounting services, right? And we see the money going from the association to the contractor. That's all we see. If someone happens to be getting a kickback on the back end, it's not something that we ever see. And frankly, I don't want to know about it.
Of course.
I've actually never seen it, which is probably good. Because when you're managing the money, you don't see it if you're managing it in a professional way. We hear about it. I've been approached by board members to get kickbacks on different things, or, hey, if I give you a referral to this job, like, just give me a kickback. And it's usually done in like a very like, I couldn't possibly,
Right.
It's like, it's not me. Just refuse to interact. I'm sure it still exists. It has to still exist on some level. But like anything else, it's like, if you
there are the good people and there are the bad people, and the bad people are always going to be bad regardless of what the law is, and the good people are going to be good regardless of what the guidelines are, because they're just good people.
Right.
Exactly. Well said.
Another quickie. Your company's legacy service as a general contractor, how much does that inform who you are as a consulting firm? Is that a big piece of the DNA?
Yeah, I think it's tremendously beneficial to be able to understand the psyche and the perspective of a contractor. We also have a lot of, like I said before, former architects or former engineers who may still be licensed and just not practicing as an architect or engineer, who understand the perspective of the architects and the engineers and the contractors. And so we need to be able to be credible when we're talking with them.
You never said how many employees you all have.
So right now, nationwide, I think we're hovering around 3,000. We're the largest. Yeah, we're the largest project management owner representation company in the country.
And how many
A little different
locally?
than being employee number 10.
A little bit different. Locally, we've got around 100
In South Florida.
in South Florida,
Nice.
and it's growing. Cumming Group absorbed us. They acquired Amicon, and since our acquisition, there's been at least 2 other acquisitions in South Florida. So we have a new office in Wynwood right now that just continues to grow. And with that, you talk about the market. Like we are so tuned into the market because we're in it in so many different
Yeah, you've got
elements.
great perspective. You're seeing it from a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah. So,
So
I guess that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's great. So it's engineers, right? We saw what happened in the aftermath of the Surfside tragedy. We saw the $1 billion settlement. Engineers are obviously on notice in a different way than they used to be. They've got reporting requirements that even if they existed, were not enforced universally. What change have you seen in sort of the demeanor and the approach of engineers that maybe is different than it was 5 years ago?
Everything is so much more conservative. Everything.
Is it all CYA? Is it all CYA? Is it like, we're not
Everything.
going to put our stamp on anything unless ...
I've got a hotel project I'm doing right now. I personally enjoy hospitality. I love hotels. I love restaurants. That's more my vibe. And
There are so many good restaurants that have opened since the New Yorkers came.
I know there's also mediocre restaurants that have closed. but you're so right.
We've become a foodie town.
We really have. So I'm doing this hotel project right now, and we have relatively minor concrete repairs that back in the day you would have just patched concrete over them and called it a day, right? Like maybe cleaned the rebar, maybe and then just patched it on. There may have been an inspection, and if there was an inspection, it probably would have been some photos to the engineer, and you're good to go. Now I have a whole report. You're chipping back concrete beyond where you would typically chip it, right? You're cleaning the rebar. You may be splicing the rebar, and I'm getting technical. And then there's a formal inspection. There's a documented report. There's a stamp. And it takes a lot longer, and it's more expensive, but everybody's covered.
Do you attribute all of this to Surfside? Is this all really a post-Surfside condition?
And the
Or just the maturation of the market? I mean, is it...
I think it's a combination of both, but I think more for out-of-market clients who really didn't understand what was happening before, right? I'm not normalizing the negligence, but there's a lot of negligence here that kind of became the norm. I think now you have out-of-town developers who just know that something bad happened in Surfside and know that it can never happen again.
Well, and
So
you
they're being
also
more
have
conservative.
some sophisticated condo owners moving in from other states who want to make sure it's done with a proper remediation, and that they're protected as board members or owners because they don't want it coming back on them in the future.
Yeah, and I think that awareness it's great, because you used to have board members complaining and screaming and throwing things. Literally, they would do that. I mean, they would throw coffee across the room.
We once, I'll never forget the time we had to have the police department at a board meeting because the owners were revolting against the board.
It could always be worse.
Yeah.
You remember a time? I mean, we've had that.
Yeah. No, I was
Like
being
one of-
nice, but at least 10 times.
John's like,
I've
you mean last night?
I wear a bulletproof vest to these things. Man.
I mean, I've had at least 10 times the police were called.
So let me
crazy.
let me build the engineering question, because it ties into one again.
Yeah.
We get this a lot, and I think you guys probably have amazing perspective on it. And I will just put a personal asterisk. I'm on the precipice of doing what I know you're doing, which is a major home renovation.
Yeah.
And we've had various iterations of permits tied up in the city for weeks and now going on months. Permitting seems to be a massive bottleneck in the post-Surfside world as well. Are you seeing any alleviation of that? I think a lot of our listeners and viewers are just so angst-ridden with how long it takes to get these projects permitted to begin with, that it's hard to even put a timeline on them to say, well, look, all this sounds great, and maybe part of the reason why contractors are also sitting around waiting for jobs and
they can't get the permits
because they're not getting permits.
And by the way, this affects our audience that are single-family homeowners.
Oh, it affects
Oh, man.
everybody. I mean, it's affecting me as a homeowner in the city.
Absolutely.
Of
They're
Miami.
doing a driveway, a roof, a this, a that, and they can't even get a permit.
And I'm
me
not
6 months to get my driveway permit.
I'm not castigating the city. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
I would probably have some personal comments about it off air, but the reality is, it is what it is. What are you seeing in terms of any movement on that, or is it just getting worse because the projects are piling up?
Combination of it's getting worse because projects are piling up. I don't think it's a lack of effort by the municipalities to streamline the process.
Did they have enough people working in those departments?
I don't believe so, and I think it's just a heavier workload for the existing people that are there.
They need more people because we have more construction.
And I also think, and I mean, it's trickle down economics, right? But when there's so much work, right?
Sound like a Republican.
Then I don't know who your audience is, so
But trickle down was a Republican.
It was.
Economic. Okay, go ahead.
Reagan would be a Democrat today.
Reaganomics. Go
Reagan
ahead.
would be a Democrat today. But anyway, go ahead.
We're a different discussion.
different
right?
discussion,
Turn the
right.
mics off, but there's so much work. There's so many plans coming in, and budgets are tight, timelines are tight, right? And they get more constrained when the front end takes longer.
But
right?
they're getting huge permitting fees, and I think they're diverting that money to other areas of the city because they're not putting it back into hiring
the infrastructure,
more.
yeah.
They're not putting the money back into the building department that needs to deal with this stuff.
So it sounds
they're
like-
getting big permitting fees, the cities now.
So it sounds like your answer is no. You haven't seen any seismic shift in the way it's going. It basically.
No, I think it's been getting worse, and I think that it's not for lack of effort of it getting better.
Can I ask another question on that topic?
Yeah,
You're doing a project at your house. You have a permit expediter?
I do.
Explain
Everybody
to the
does,
public what a permit expediter is and why you either need one in today's environment or you don't.
So a permit expediter is somebody who, I'm going to call it like it is, has the relationships with the reviewers in the city and all of the employees that are in the city involved in the plan review process, and ensures that they're prioritizing your project. And
So they get the thing from structural, and they'll take it to make sure it gets to fire. And then from fire, they'll make sure it gets to electrical and then to plumbing, because for every man over here, it has to pass through all of the trades and all of the different sub-departments of the building department. And it has to be passed for electrical, passed for plumbing. It has to be passed for structural. It has to be passed for fire and safety. And so each one of those sub-departments has a reviewer for your plans, so that by the time you have your plans, quote unquote, reviewed, they've been reviewed by 6 different pieces of the building department. And so the expediter is making sure it gets through that process and doesn't get stuck.
And so what I've seen is, like, the different municipalities are they're calculating the timelines where the plans stay in their department, right? So they'll have time with owner, time with municipality, so they can document how it's not taking a long time, right? What's not really quantified there is the amount of time it takes to respond and explain what's happening on the plans to the reviewers, which is technically time with owner, right?
Those are the notes you have to give them to explain what they need answers to.
Right. So I can tell you, outside of just workload and there being a large volume, I think also the understanding of what's on the plans and continuity in reviewers, because also just for your edification,
Please.
if we were all the reviewers here reviewing plans, okay, and I'm the structural reviewer, okay, and Josh is the electrical reviewer, and David is the mechanical reviewer, okay, there's a first round where we all look at the plans, and very rarely do we say, it looks great, here you go.
No, they always have questions.
They always have questions and comments, and I think that's appropriate, okay? So we all mark it up and give our comments back to the architect, who then reviews it with the owner, and they put together a narrative and responses.
And they resubmit.
Second time the plans go around, I'm on vacation. So Abraham is now reviewing the structural plans. Abraham's got new comments because he views things differently or may not understand the context.
Oh, so you get a different reviewer.
So you get a different reviewer.
Oh, boy.
Right? So now I have new comments. I satisfied the first ones, but now I have a second round. Give it to Josh. Josh approves it. Great. So you're approved in his department.
See, I'm the easy guy.
So you're constantly getting iterative comments, which is counterproductive. And that happens often. And I think a lot of times just due to the strenuous workload of being in the city.
They don't have enough bodies.
Bodies or internal communication. And so
and some controls around some of the variables that you're talking about, which is to say, guys, we keep starting the process all over again on these people.
Yeah.
Like, not many people are measuring the experience of the end
Took
user.
me
But
18 months to get my plans approved by the city of Miami for my Wynwood project to do some internal work in the driveway.
Right.
18 months. Admittedly,
It's not
it started
shocking,
during
it's crazy.
It started during COVID.
Didn't help.
And of course, during COVID, getting the city to do things, it wasn't easy. It wasn't necessarily their fault. People were out sick. People were working remotely.
Right.
Let me tell you, there's still a backlog.
Still a backlog. But back to the permit expediter, like what's the value in a permit expediter? Permit expediter will recognize who the new reviewer is if there's a new reviewer and either say, okay, we're not giving it to this reviewer because they don't understand the history, right? Or I need to explain the history to them so that they understand.
Or they'll go to the supervisor and say, this
Exactly.
is stuck. Right. It's been stuck for a month with this person.
And he knows the supervisor drinks caramel macchiatos, and one happens to show up when they show up at the building department.
It's true. I mean, it's politics, it's lobbying, it exists, but you need them.
Right.
You need them. And I think being an outsider in this market, you're at a tremendous disadvantage.
Okay. I want to get to the wrap.
We're going to. I got one last quick question
me.
before we pivot to the close of our show and your wrap. And
I really am
I'm
respecting that you're right.
This is gonna be a tough question.
Respect.
But we're not gonna do any follow-ups on this, and we're just gonna let you answer. So it's gonna be dead mic to you. Condo association engaging in a project, and they are looking at owners' reps. What is the one question you would encourage them to ask any owner's rep to help them qualify the viability of their firm?
Great question.
One question. Don't miss this question.
Who are the people from your firm that are going to be representing our community, and what relevant and recent experience do they have, and what percentage will they be dedicated to my project? What relationships do they have in the market with engineers and contractors that I can verify?
I'm going to give you the pass that it was actually 4 questions in one run-on sentence, but that's a great answer.
You like
Great
that?
answer.
I think I got it.
Well, because look, what's meaningful is those relationships and your recent history and experience. Because I know recent is very different than experience. You can be a very experienced owner's rep, but it doesn't mean that the project that they worked on last year is even remotely relevant to what's in front of them at the condos.
I'll tell you what,
It's always about who is going to be on your project.
Right. And
like you said,
yes.
It's am I getting your A team? And if they're your A team, explain to me why they're your A team.
Right.
Let me tell you,
or your A team for this particular project.
Yeah.
Because as John
Well,
pointed
that's what
out,
I
it
meant.
may be to say, listen, that's our high-rise guy. That's the guy who knows 40 stories and up, to say this is a different scale job.
or like your community is crazy.
Right.
And this person's fantastic at managing
They're
personalities.
bulletproof, and they can take it, and they can win people over.
and you're going to need them.
Right.
Now, let me tell you the question that we often get asked. It's usually the first question, and it's the most irrelevant question. Actually, it's not a question. Most of the time, it's a demand. I want somebody 100% of the time on site. That is 100% not necessary from an owner's
It's a
rep.
waste of time and money.
It is
For everybody.
the most inefficient use of personnel for an owner's rep to be on the construction site 100% of the time. A lot of our job is administrative. A lot of our job is strategic. We need to be in environments where we can activate those parts of our brains.
Would you say that's also true for a brand new construction, or more only for like a condo job?
Well, I also think, and before you answer, I also think it's where the nomenclature gets confused quickly of saying there's a difference between an owner's rep and a project manager.
Absolutely. And the other thing too is, I think there's a concept around owner representation that it's the owner's rep's job or the project manager's job to put their foot on the GC's throat. Right? That could not be further from the
No,
truth.
you got to work with the GC.
It should be the most collaborative, positive environment. You're doing difficult things together. You have to have a strong level of rapport and trust. So here's what we used to get asked, right? And actually we still get asked is, you have your own guys and you like working with them and you're corrupt. Okay. That's how corrupt, unethical people think, right? I would never think that way. And the answer is absolutely. I have people that I prefer working with.
Because you trust that they're going to get the
Right,
job
they've done the
done.
job done well. Right.
Exactly. Right. And that's with anything. You should always want to work with people that you want to work with. Right. And it's better for everyone. I don't want to have to recreate the wheel. So an element of familiarity is always advantageous.
Right.
Let's get to wrap
Yeah,
now.
We're
Talk to me.
pivoting
We're
here
ready
in our
for
last-
wrap.
In our last few minutes here, first question out of the gate, how? Like, like it was,
Yeah.
we follow each other's social media accounts, and one day I sort of stumble on Jonathan rapping, and it was like, all right, so I guess there was a pivot there. I
Right.
checked LinkedIn real quickly to make sure you were still with Cummings. I wanted to, that this
Sure.
wasn't.
So this is going to be long-winded. I don't care if we're short on time. I got to explain the whole thing to you.
Go for it.
So I had some pretty impactful family news that happened a couple of years ago, and it just changed my headspace around everything. And it was somewhat of a premature midlife crisis. But I recognized.
I like that. Get it out of the way.
Yeah, that's also the name of the mixtape, by the way.
Nice.
The midlife crisis. But it made me recognize that, listen, there's a lot of things that I would like to explore, and I didn't because I felt like my professional image might be compromised by doing them, right? And I had been very reserved. I mean, I worked my ass off for a long time to get to where I am, as we all have, and I think we recognize that. But there's collateral damage that comes along with that, and I think that you sacrifice a lot, whether it's personal relationships or passions. And I just recognized that this is something that I was very interested in. And I had one of my closest friends had this unbelievable wedding in Casa de Campo. And you've been to Casa de Campo?
We need more friends like that, by the way.
I also got married in Casa de Campo.
See,
First time or second time?
The second wedding was
Okay, get back to the answer.
so he had this unbelievable wedding, and there were a lot of people in the entertainment business that were there. And so I used to, I used to rap and stuff in college, and that's when it was fun for me and something that I did. So
In the dugout?
I would do it in the dugout. I would do it in the locker room. I would do it in the outfield when no one was hitting the ball to me. Yeah. So my friends were like, "Hey, you should write a rap, like an introductory rap, because our villa was hosting this after party." And so I did it. And to me, it was pretty easy. And so it went very well. And afterwards, there were some people who were pretty credible who were like, "You might want to do something with this." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay. I'm going to ditch my career and become a rapper." And they're like, No. Like, you should really do something with this. So
Vanilla Ice Part 2, right?
No.
wow, that's
Come
tough.
on.
Wow, speaking of
that
being
was-
tough, wow.
I mean, every man.
That's it. I was going
Right.
to say, and we've
Stop
lost
that,
him.
every man.
And just because,
only man. I do
just
not
because he's from
identify as
Miami.
being. So I was like, you know what? Let me explore this. So I did my own podcast, like over COVID, like everyone started their own podcast, and I had one. And so I went to the producer of my podcast. They had a studio, and they also had they had a lot of Latin music artists would come and record there. And I'm like, listen, it's like, I got a bad idea. I need you to talk me out of it. But what if I made this album, and it was a hip hop album, And rather than it be focused on money and cars and girls and
Wives.
all that kind of stuff, right? Rather it be focused on that. So I listen to that stuff and I'm like, it's good, it's melodic, but like I can't relate to this. And like some guys, I'm like, all right, you're too rich. I'm not that rich. I can't relate to flying back and forth on a G6. So I'm like, what if I made really good music, but it was relatable and it had content that the listeners in my demographic or a reasonably relative demographic could relate to? And he's like, I actually think it's good. And I'm like, but what if it's not just funny? Like, what if it's good and it's quality and there's messaging there, not like religious rock, because arguably that's not great music. Like, what if it was quality? It's like, it's great, but like, are you any good? I'm like, I don't know. So we made a song that night. It was so bad. It was terrible. But I knew I could do better. So I'm like, you know what? Let me just lean into this and it'll be a hobby and whatever. So that's kind of how it started. And then I've met a lot of really great people in that industry because there's a whole industry I didn't understand. So it's no different than like if you've never built anything before and you meet a guy who does construction, you're like, okay, this is what the industry is. Same thing with music. It's like you meet someone who kind of does music and you're like, oh, this is what the industry is. Then you meet somebody at the next tier, then the next tier, and then
you meet someone from Criteria Studios.
Ooh, nice plug. Well done.
Yeah.
So then you meet somebody who really does it. And then you understand it's a business like anything else. And the people and the talent, right, who are doing it at a high level could do a lot of things at a high level. And to do something at a high level, it's a lot of effort, a lot of thought, a lot of failure, a lot of reflection, a lot of collaboration. So I've leaned into it. And so I used to think that like if you're going to take something like that seriously, you got to like ditch your day job, right? And then lean into it. And now I'm like, what if I embraced the fact that I'm doing it as well? I'm not going to say on the side, but I'm doing it as well. And
It's like me with fishing, Josh.
Yes.
Go ahead.
But in all
serious.
seriousness, yes, it's totally.
I'm not ditching my day job, but serious fishing. Go ahead.
No, and I think it lends itself to the conversation we were having about having perspective, right? When you have something else that you're pouring energy into, that you're passionate about, right? You can come back to the other thing or other things with a fresh perspective, right? And your validation doesn't come from one thing exclusively. So inherently, you do all of them better when you're more emotionally removed from them.
And when you're more balanced.
Absolutely. And so I actually teach a course at the University of Miami now. It's called Applied Project Management. It's really figuring out how to get things done
while rapping to your students.
While rapping that may or may not be in the next music video.
Okay, so can we hear a little rap?
So you asked me how I got into rapping, right? And I realized that I think I want to be a hip hop artist. And I think that I picked the hardest way to try and get in. I'm in my 30s and I settled in a comfortable career. And yeah, I made a little money, but the last 10 years I got burnt out from this hustling. With this, money's not the motivating factor. Because now that I've been making it, I feel no different after. I was always trying to climb the corporate ladder, but I couldn't help but ask myself, does any of it matter? And now from where I'm sitting, I think that I would rather go back to when I needed it. Back when I was seeking it, back when I was desperate for direction, back before we gave a damn about followers and mentions, when I could live authentically and not worry about the consequence, back when I was saving money, stashing all the condiments, back when I was crippling with debt, back when frat boys popped the bottles in the club because their parents paid tuition, they drove around in Range Rovers chilling on their parents' dime. I had no AC, I couldn't tolerate the Fahrenheit. Back when I had student loans at 8%, back when I had a roommate split the rent, I would borrow cars that I couldn't afford to purchase yet. I would get a surgery and I'd try and sell a Percocet. Back to the beginning. Back before my parents got divorced. When no one had my back, but I'd still cover yours. Back when I would dream about DeLoreans and hoverboards. Back when I would listen to my parents' arguments. Back before Back to the Future never led to Parkinson's.
That's awesome.
That's all I got.
That's amazing.
That was great. That was great.
That.
What a great, oh man. Can't wait to see your full album. And thank you so much for being on our
You got
podcast.
Absolutely.
Sun, Sand, and Sold is so much better for having our own personal rapper.
I was going to say now.
If you guys need a theme song.
Now
just,
definitely we need a
well,
theme song.
We'll definitely look at a replacement. Jonathan, it's been great having you aboard as always.
Awesome.
Kyle and David. This is Sun, Sand, and Soul. Join us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Instagram, and pretty much everything else that's out there. Links are on the website, sunsandandsoul.com. This is Josh Tomey. Have a great day.